Friends and learners, welcome back to another video lecture on the topic learning spaces and introduction. I hope you are aware about how the learning spaces have changed. Now the teaching learning process is not only restricted inside the classroom, it goes beyond the classroom, and that's why we call classrooms without walls. So now learning can happen at any place. So the way learning spaces are looked at have changed. So keeping the relevance of the changing learning spaces and its importance, in this video we are going to talk about learning spaces in a detailed way. Let us see how it has changed and what all activities, what all steps or what all precautions we need to keep in mind when we engage in the teaching learning process. I hope this lecture would help you to understand the learning spaces in a good way. So if you see a simple definition, we can say that learning spaces are nothing but they are dedicated places. It can be real or virtual, where learners engage in learning for knowledge construction. Or we can also say, again, this is going to be a simple explanation, a place where the teaching and learning occur. So friends, it is not something a big or elaborate definition, very simple, a place where the teaching and learning takes place or occur. And we are very much aware about the learning spaces. Say in a traditional classroom or a face-to-face classroom, the classrooms are the learning spaces. Most of the time teachers and students are in the classroom, and that's where the students and teachers engage in the teaching learning process. And once the students complete the learning activities, they will automatically develop knowledge, and that's how they will learn new things. So friends, let us say that in simple terms, learning spaces are places where learning is taking place, or teaching and learning is taking place. Now, there are different categories of learning spaces. The one common learning space which we are aware about is the classrooms. As I said, where teachers and students engage in the classrooms. And this is common in school education and higher education. In both school and higher education, we used to see the classrooms. But see, the learning spaces can also be categorized according to the age level, like say for example small students like LKG students or UKG students, their learning space is something different from the school students, which is again something different from the higher education students. Again, this is different from the what we say students who are doing medical education or engineering education. So age wise we can have learning spaces, level wise also, as I was saying, school, higher education, and in higher education also there are different types of education. Professional and non-professional education is also there, which belongs to higher education. So that is the second category you may be seeing. Then depending upon the physical and mental development of students, like we are seeing special schools, schools for deaf students, schools for blind students. So it depends upon the physical and mental development of the students also. So the learning spaces which we see in school or is learning space for students having some eye issues or deaf students, their learning setting or learning spaces are different. So this is also another category which we can talk about when we are discussing about the learning spaces. Then depending upon the pedagogy also. See, a common pedagogy, a teaching method which we use is the lecture method, where we don't want too much of what we say infrastructural facilities, but of course we need to have. But what I am trying to say is, if you are taking about or if you are using the experimental method of pedagogy or teaching method, then the setting has to be different. So learning spaces then changes according to the pedagogy also. Then depending upon the subject we can have learning spaces. Then depending upon the subject we can have different learning spaces. Again, based on the organization also we can have, like private schools, unaided schools, then government organizations. So everywhere classroom is common, but then we can say that there are learning spaces based on the organization also, which is somewhat have little bit of difference, but there are many things which are common, even though it is categorized based on the organization. So friends, this slide gives a brief idea about the different types of learning spaces. I hope you have understood the concept or the categories of learning spaces which are based on age, level, pedagogy, subject matter, organization, etc. Now we are moving to another important concept. The learning spaces are also dependent on the different modes of education, which is very important. So when we talk about the different modes of education, we can say face-to-face is one of the major modes of education. The second is the distance education. The third, the online mode of education, and the fourth is blended mode of education. So the learning spaces that we see in face-to-face, distance, online and blended mode, they are different, but you can see many things common in all these modes of education. So let us now see how the learning spaces are in different modes of education. So for example, learning space in a face-to-face atmosphere or face-to-face classroom. We also call it like a traditional classroom or conventional classroom. And what is that? The simple classrooms that we see across the country, irrespective of the mode of education, irrespective of this, like level of education, irrespective of the level of education, school education or higher education. So what are the learning spaces there? Classroom is one of the major learning spaces, and this is where teachers come, teach and goes, and students engage in different learning activities. So classroom, apart from classroom, they sometimes take the students to different, outside the classroom also, the environment. So it can be anywhere, nature, it can be any other place out of the classroom. The other learning space may be the library, which you will see, which we are seeing in the schools and higher education institution. It can be out of the educational institution also. Then laboratory is another learning space. Then the home where the students live, it can also be considered a learning space because many activities they complete at their home. So that is also another learning space. Then friends, the next one, the online and offline learning spaces. And this is one point which I would like to focus, because we are talking about how technology can be integrated in the teaching learning process. So even though it is face-to-face classroom where major activities takes place in the classroom, but with the emergence of technologies, many technologies are also used to educate, or many technologies are also used for the teaching learning purposes. So now the learning space is not only limited to the classroom. Many things they learn what we say virtually. So a concept of virtual classroom also. The normal classroom is there. In contradictory, we have the virtual classrooms also. We will talk about virtual classroom more in the next slide. So friends, classroom the major one, then environment, library, laboratory, home, other online and offline spaces. So there is no boundary to that way when we talk about online and offline spaces. It can be with the help of internet, it may be without the internet help, offline. So friends, these are some of the learning spaces which are there in the face-to-face atmosphere or face-to-face mode of education. Now coming to the second, distance education, where we will find absence of physical presence of both teacher and students. They will be at some distance, they are separated by distance. So classroom is also there, but even though they are separated, but many or some of the activities, even though it is distance education, some of the activities the students need to go to the classroom and they have to engage in the activities, teaching learning process. So even though it is not in a big way, classrooms are also a part of learning spaces in the distance education. Then there is no boundary where the learning spaces are located. It can be when the learner gets a time at their office, they may study. So office is a learning space. Travel, when they travel, they study. When they are at their home, they study. This can be also online. So similar to face-to-face education, many things are now delivered online. So online can also be considered a learning space. So friends, these are some of the, maybe we can say, the learning spaces which usually we see at the in the distance education, distance mode of education. Now the next is online, the third category. So in online, we are neither meeting the students that way physically. A complete program, a course is delivered online. So if that is the case, then where will be the learning spaces in online mode of education? Most of the time that will be in the online world or virtual space, or we call it as virtual classroom. So the entire process which happens in a normal or traditional classroom, which will be replicated in the online world or virtual space, and that's why we call it as a virtual classroom. So that is one of the major learning spaces in the online courses. Then some activities they can also complete offline, so offline tools can also be considered. Then as I said, major activities are replicated in the virtual world. The activities which are taking place in a face-to-face classroom, this will be entirely replicated in the virtual space. So we need to have some kind of a tool which would help us to accomplish these tasks, the entire process of educating, the entire process of organizing, then administering, then completing the entire process of entire teaching learning process. So how this will be possible? Technologies are there. One of the technologies which supports in setting up a virtual classroom is the learning management system. So friends, learning management system, making use of learning management system, we can almost complete the activities which happens in a face-to-face classroom in the virtual world. So LMS has got so much of relevance. So we will be talking little more about LMS maybe after the next slide. Then the teaching learning apps. So in an online mode of education, we don't have that way learning spaces like classroom or any such places like the environment and all. Many of the activities are happening in the virtual world, and that's why we call it as virtual classroom. So friends, I hope you have understood. Now let us talk about learning spaces in blended mode. What is blended mode? We have discussed about blended mode of education. Even then I would just like to talk little about the blended mode of education. In blended mode of education, the features of both online education and offline education or face-to-face education is combined, is blended. So a course or a program which is running for 1 or 2 years, some part of the course or program we will be teaching face to face, some part of the program or course we will be teaching in the online mode. This is the blending of both face to face and maybe we can say the distance or online mode of education. So friends, in blended mode then you can see the learning spaces which happens both in the face to face mode and distance or online mode, like classroom, environment, library, laboratory, home, and all the technology tools or virtual classroom. So this is how the learning spaces are in the blended mode of education. So I hope you have had developed some understanding about the learning spaces and the kind of learning spaces which are there in different modes of education. And when I was talking about the different learning spaces in different modes of education, I was quoting that learning management system has got good amount of relevance in the teaching learning process, because the teaching learning activities which happens in a face to face mode can be replicated in the what we say the technology integrated or ICT integrated classroom or virtual classroom. So then as you see in the slide, see what are the activities, major activities which happens in the face to face classroom: teaching, then giving assignments, then classroom discussion, then conducting examination. For all these activities, the students and teachers has to be physically present in the classroom. So these activities we are replicating in the virtual classroom. So teaching will be then online teaching. So we need to have tools for that. Assignment can be given electronically. The responses can be submitted, electronically. Then the classroom discussions, here in virtual classroom we have online discussion for which we make use of discussion forum. Examinations, here it is online examination. And this is what we see in this MOOC program also, this particular MOOC program. You are getting online support or online teaching, then you are submitting assignments, you are taking part in discussion through online discussion forums, then you are attempting the examination also, which is also online. So friends, to complete the activities which are seeing on the right side, like online teaching, electronic assignment, online discussion forum, online test, everything is managed by a software for which we need to have a specific software, and that software is the learning management system software. So now we are going to talk a little about the learning management system, what it is and why it is important. If you talk about a definition, we can say LMS is a software application or software based program used for management, administration, documentation, tracking, reporting and delivery of educational courses and training programs or learning or any development programs. So this is basically, we can say in simple terms, they are softwares which would help us to deliver a program or course. When we are delivering a program or course, it has to be managed, it has to be administered, this has to be documented, we need to take the tracking, we need to track the students' progress. So all those has to be accomplished. So this LMS software would help us for that, to deliver a complete program in the virtual world or virtual space. Now why it is used for? This is not only used in the education process, it is used for employee training, customer training, partner training. So there are various places where learning management systems are used. Say for example, if you are working in a bank, to give training to your employees in your bank, LMS can be used. So there are various places LMS are used. So that's why this is used by small business people to corporate training people. Then this is also equally used in the educational organizations. Then what are the different components of LMS? You will find some standard compliance, e-learning standard compliance. So every LMS will have some e-learning standard compliance. This can be accessed through various channels. You have facilities for managing your courses, you have facilities for managing your content, then facilities for social and experiential learning. You will find the calendar of activities. Then there are facilities for tracking and reporting the students' progress. There are facilities for conducting assessment and awarding certificates, and this is possible anywhere, like since it is offered virtually or through online, this is possible, like the learning is possible anywhere. So that's why we call it as anywhere learning. So friends, these are some of the components or features normally the learning management systems have. Now coming to the types of LMS, there are majorly three types. One, the proprietary LMS, then open source LMS and the cloud based LMS. You are seeing on the slide some of the examples, like in proprietary Blackboard you can consider. If it is an open source, Moodle is one of the open source. We have Google Classroom also. If it is cloud based LMS, then Amazon Web Services you can use. So these are some of the types of LMS. So I would say majorly they fall under three categories. One, the paid, the other is open source, and the third is cloud based. Now friends, how it works, in the coming maybe videos you will be seeing how actually the learning management system will work. But for the time being, I would show in an LMS, if you are a teacher, you will be developing the courses, you will enroll your students learn and complete the program. So this is in brief how it works. So if you are a teacher, you will have a learning management system software, you will develop your course in the learning management system software, you will invite your students to join that course, they will learn and they will complete the course. This is in brief. and we are going to see how this will work in Google Classroom, how this is going to work in Google Classroom and Moodle. We will have separate kind of sessions for Google Classroom and Moodle. I will be demonstrating how the Google Classroom and Moodle can be used as an LMS platform for offering your programs or courses. So, in Moodle or Google Classroom, this is the basic function how they will be working. Now, some of the advantages, as you can see, there will be consistency in learning. You can track students' progress. Multiple resources, like in LMS we will give audio resources, video resources, teaching learning materials like text. It can be a word text, it can be a PDF formatted text, it can be anything. So, students get different types of resources for learning. This will be up to date. Whenever there is a change in the learning content, that can be easily updated. So, it is up to date, easy for distribution, anywhere learning is possible. Your cost that way it is very less. If you are making use of Google Classroom or Moodle, you do not have to pay that way, but Moodle have a paid version also. So, friends, that way it is cost effective. Adaption and reuse of learning resources is also possible. Then a centralized training is also possible. So, friends, if you are talking about the LMS features or advantages, these are some of the points which we can quote. So, friends, with this I would like to wind up today's lecture. In this lecture we have talked about learning spaces, then we had discussed about the relevance of learning management systems, and we have discussed some of the aspects or features of different learning management systems. I hope you have understood the concepts that we have discussed in this video lecture. Thank you.